I am so privileged to be here with a friend and someone I've had the pleasure to work with, Ricardo Dos Santos. Ricardo, thank you so much for joining me. Ricardo is now a partner and head of the venture studio at Takeda Digital Ventures. Ricardo, love to hear a little bit about your journey.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. It's always good to speak with you. I was very recently heading up new business creation at ResMed. I did lots of interesting things, but became intrigued by some things happening in digital health that touched pharma companies. And I think where pharmas could be big protagonists in ushering this field along. That's why I made this switch. And then from a venture studio perspective, I've had that similar role at ResMed, and it's a similar thing that I'm doing here.
Let's go there then. What is a venture studio and why do we need them? And particularly, why do we need them in digital health?
So Venture Studio is an organization that combines the entrepreneurial muscle that you need for innovation with capital resources that you need to fund that innovation. So those two basic elements are actually within the same box versus the traditional, they're two separate entities that are trying to find each other. And so you start with this kind of union and church and state. There is still this dialogue of buyer seller happening within that same box. Some people play the role of, what about this idea? Some people play the role of, is this the best thing to bet on? There's opportunity costs, but you are part of the same organization and you come to an agreement to pursue a few things forward as essentially a new company, a startup organization. So another analogy I'd make, it's a startup factory.
So, if we think about it in the context of Takeda Digital Ventures, say a little bit about what you focus on broadly, and if that focus is different as you think about venture investments versus what you're trying to launch and build inside the venture studio.
So I work within Takeda Digital Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of Takeda that's focused on digital health. And Takeda Digital Ventures does make call it traditional corporate venture capital investments in startups, seed stage, and even later rounds. But within Takeda Digital Ventures, we do have a venture studio. That's when we see an opportunity to create a new company that we feel the market should have. And we don't quite see someone doing what fits our vision. And so we'll recruit entrepreneurs, match them up with kind of the hunch that we have that there's a big idea there somewhere. And we'll get some pre-incubation efforts going. And if we pass those tests, we'll start a company and then fund it just like any other startup we would have found on the outside. The difference is we're co-founders of that particular company. But funny enough, from an equity percentage, off balance sheet type of thing that corporate venture capital does, it's very similar. Now, the goal is not to have a majority share of something we create. The goal is for that to be a startup out there with a minority investment from somebody like Takeda.
Very compelling, and it seems the heart of it, probably why it works so well, but also the biggest challenge is finding that overlap between that idea or that opportunity you see in the market and the entrepreneur or maybe the entrepreneurial team that can execute it. In practice, how do you find the idea or find the entrepreneur? Which way does it go?
Right. At a high level, there's probably two, call it general approaches to a venture studio. Some venture studios prefer to work on the idea themselves, meaning the staff that works in the venture studio, and spend some considerable time looking at opportunities, shortlisting the things that they feel the studio should create, basically doing fundamental research, writing the business plan for something, and doing some partial validation, and essentially getting it to a point where they could hand this very well thought through thesis to some seasoned entrepreneurs that match up with the domain area that could take it from there and do the proverbial, now go and execute. They're starting off with a pretty well thought through idea. And, with that comes a bit of adequate ownership percentage between the studio that's done X amount of work and has de-risked the opportunity with the entrepreneur that comes in to take it over as essentially a management team. The other approach is to not go that far with an idea. A rough idea was one way to put it. And then earlier than the previous model, finding an entrepreneur that seems to match, seems to have the same curiosity, the same wish to go create something in that space where you align from a vision perspective, details aside. And then you begin to work with that entrepreneur to actually build the initial business plan. So you bring them in a lot earlier in the process. That comes with greater amount of work to get to the right idea from the entrepreneur, and thus a greater equity percentage for the entrepreneur. We kind of prefer that second overall approach, bringing in the entrepreneur.
He or she had the opportunity to shape the idea into something that
Right,
they
right,
then want to go execute.
right.
Why doesn't every entrepreneur want to do this with you or someone like that? Why wouldn't they want to do this with you if they have an idea, that aligns to a thesis of yours?
Right. It's not going to work for everyone. I would say here are the conditions in which it could make sense. So first of all, the entrepreneur having an idea or not, at some point, they're going to want or not want to have an additional co-founder for that idea. The venture studio, a lot of it is Ricardo, is essentially a co-founder that you're considering. The venture studio will have co-founding shares. So are you good just yourself, or are you seeking yet another co-founder for a variety of reasons, more help on the business side, the connection side, et cetera? The second, I think, reason is access to capital. So one of the things that the studio co-founder brings to the table is access to capital. I tell people, think about me as the guy with a rich uncle. But I was thinking, I go pitch it. So we do think we add value as our collective intelligence, meaning the studio and our employees and the folks that are around the overall Takeda Digital Ventures, our advisors, a tremendous amount of knowledge in certain spaces of digital health. And we kind of bring that to the table, plus the people themselves in the venture studio that will work with that entrepreneur. So that's exhibit A. How do I like that? And then we spend 2 to 3 months as an EIR getting paid a stipend to write a plan together and then pitch it to this captive audience of the Takeda Digital Ventures Fund. And it is a bit of a straight route to an interested investor whose employees themselves are co-founders. And so there's that belief that if I join up with these folks as co-founders, there's a high chance of getting seed funding. If I don't really need a co-founder, and I think I have quick access to capital, I could see my way through, seed funding, no issues based on my network, et cetera, then it may not make sense to need the help of a venture studio.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Is there something about digital health as a category that you think lends itself to the venture studio model?
Great point. In access to a co-founder, that part of it, I think that comes also with wanting access to domain knowledge, to connections in the field. So certainly if you haven't been around the block a ton in the fun world of digital health.
I would argue, just having
yeah.
been fortunate to be around the block in digital health in a bunch, you could have done something deep in one area and your next idea may be related to pharma.
Right, correct. There's lots of shortcuts, lots of time savers from people who have experience or can get you to folks who can give you some answers. So it is an area where we can say this about everything, but it takes a village. So when you partner with something like a venture studio or an accelerator, a seed stage VC, you get that sort of village help, which I feel for sure in digital health, it's very, very useful. The incentives aren't aligned, et cetera. So I think that's one reason I believe a venture studio in digital health works. The second is venture studios can vary as far as the amount of money that comes next as far as seed funding. And for some of the things we do, which are tech-enabled services, maybe call it some not overly complex software plays, et cetera, there's money for that. There's money to pre-incubate something like that, to provide it seed funding and see the venture get to market, get a first customer, do that kind of product market fit validation while we're still young. And there's medtech, there's hardcore life sciences, new drug discovery fit the studio model as well. Maybe not. Certainly the studio would have to come with a different appetite for risk. Venture studios like quicker to market kinds of things. High hit rates in a startup is relevant here. Do they all become unicorns? Maybe not, but I think things that are filling a market need that we can see some form of exit happening, more so than sort of ultra high risk.
Yeah, well, and things where domain knowledge, pattern matching can actually accelerate, right? I also imagine, as a pitch for not just any venture studio, but what you guys are doing is the portfolio that Takeda Digital Ventures has and the ability to learn from what the portfolio has done would be incredibly helpful. So for folks, entrepreneurs looking to work in virtual care or some of the other, areas that you guys are super deep, you get that domain knowledge even faster. So let me turn it around then. So what's the characteristics of the right person? Who's the right kind of entrepreneur?
So I would say this in our case. We think ahead toward the Series A round when in our model, that's when the venture gets a priced round in the way we do things. That's when we get kind of external validation that we were onto something because we expect new investors. So we have to project that lead person. We have to project them as folks that have investor presence, at least at that Series A level. We don't design this to change courses, from pre-incubation to incubation to Series A. We say, this is a team capable of going out there, standing in front of some of the name brands in digital health investing and getting a Series A round done. So part of it is maybe they've done it before, right? Or they have roles with a similar sort of where you can kind of parlay the experience, what it took to sell an idea, what it took to get that kind of responsibility on their shoulders, that they convinced, folks that have to make big decisions to get behind them. It's that trust me with good money here and trust me to execute and I will build wealth for you. So it's either through experience, but then there's some people that they just have that charisma, the fire in the belly. They know the subject matter. They believe they have a lived experience. So we're a bit flexible as far as this looks like the next great entrepreneur. Yeah. Man, I want them as a co-founder, right?
I think part where you're going, which is there's something about the individual themselves, but having been a entrepreneur, having been an investor, there's something about the match and the passion for that concept, whether it's from lived experience, from just a passion to solve that problem. And so when you see that mix, that's really powerful. Right. So last question. In addition to coming to Takeda Digital Ventures Venture Studio to build their company, what's one piece of advice you'd give to folks building companies in digital health right now?
Be careful what you ask for. Yes, it isn't an easy place to come and play. So if you want easy, I don't think this is the place for you.
I don't know if that's
I know you're smiling, right?
Let me translate that because I did this before it was a category, but right. I think there's an era where it felt like a place where you could come build something, raise a bunch of money, and exit easily. And I think we're back to the point where it's not. And so what I might translate what you're saying, if I hear correctly, is be passionate about it. It's not a place to come and play. You got to really be connected to that mission and want to change that piece of healthcare because it's hard.
Right. So, and I'd say a couple of things. So, I mean, in everything that's ultimately successful, the stars align as far as good problem to be working on, very worthy thing to be solving for, great differentiated solution, and a business model that allows that thing to scale, right? And where we could all make money. But in digital health, it's hard to thread that needle. Right. Probably it's not trivial to actually find a real problem that people actually want to get solved and really moves in. There's a lot of sort of false problems or entrenched interest where it's not really a problem where a business could be built.
Get stuck in health.
On the solution, it's tough. You can think of a really elegant, super techie thing that just seems to provide more data, be continuous, be super accurate, and no one will use it. It's not easy to get through those first two steps. And then just when you think you're kind of done, the business models could be harrowing stuff here, as you know. And you have to have that patience on the business model side. And maybe more importantly, to get your investors to have patience that eventually you get to something really big.
And it speaks to why you want a co-founder who's walked that journey. So to bring it full circle to another reason to have a venture studio as that co-founder with you. Ricardo, thank you. Right. Let's leave it there. I really appreciate you spending the time. I always love the conversation and thank you for sharing it with the audience.
Same here. Cheers.